And make sure your mic is muted during our speeches, just to make sure we can hear everyone throughout. And also for overtime, please time yourselves. And if anyone does significantly go over time, then I will just turn my mic on and say overtime. And I obviously will not be taking notes after 7:15 as per usual, as per format rules. But so if there are no further questions or technical issues at this point, I think Nina is spectating this debate as well, but if everyone's fine being streamed, presumably also fine with having Nina watching this as well. So without further ado, I call this House to order and call upon the Prime Minister to start a case of a Zeitgeist here.
Can you hear me well? Yeah. Okay. So let's a bit clarify on the motion. So what do we mean by states protecting the languages? We believe that it's like subsidizing the universities, subsidizing them to create different specialties like faculties supporting these languages, make people better salaries to translate books from this language to another languages and so on, and artificially support this language. And what languages are actually we define as dying languages? These are languages that are not in natural use, like widespreadly. And they're not really common. You're not going to find really a job with using only this language. So probably you are a small community of probably 1,000 people. We're not talking about, for example, small ethnic groups, because we understand that this, for example, Uyghur language in Kazakhstan, it's not dying, it's still alive. There is a lot of people speaking it, a lot of books, literature, and so on. But dying languages are those that you always have to pump to live, because these native speakers don't want to support it because they find better opportunities with other languages. And we believe that in these countries with dying languages, probably most native speakers want to, they actually switch to the most common language, like let's say, I don't know, English, because they can find better opportunities there and so on. So let's talk about when states should protect anything. We believe that states should take taxes from people and put them in one specific sphere when something cannot be regulated by market forces, when some people's needs are not being satisfied. For example, when we talk about social security, we understand that there are still very vulnerable people who cannot survive when otherwise, if we don't give them money, and like the value of life is something that we agree on, everybody agrees on it. So that's why we introduce social security. That's why we introduce social help for people who cannot go up without the government help and so on. And in case of languages, like let's define two arguments we're going to talk about. First of all, that this is not acceptable to redistribute money like this. And secondly, we believe that there is better alternative to use all this money, and we will show you how. So we believe that language is not really essential to our existence. We believe that language exists as long as it serves as a means of communication. So I speak any language just to speak anything that is on my mind, to express my feelings to the world, express my needs, my wants, and to just rule my destiny overall. And to believe that things such as culture, such as religion, they are just attached to the language, but not really inseparable. Yeah, okay.
So many things are not essential to our living, such as theaters, such as museums, and etc. Governments still do systematically subsidize them. Why do they do that, and why is this thing that you're talking about is different?
Because we believe that things like theater, things like, I don't know, different pictures, they have some popularity. We believe that if you subsidize museums, people still go there because the only incentive not to go to museums was just because museums otherwise would have private fees. It would be too expensive for me to go to museum. But in case of language, we believe that even if you have a lot of, old Hindu books, I'm not trying to offend it, old Hindu books in the bookshelf, and like people are not going to just buy them because they just see them, because there is no any natural demand on them. And even if you see some specialties, you're not going to necessarily like the specialty, and chances are not really increasing just because of it. And we believe that language is not really essential because like what can we do with these dying languages? We can still preserve their culture. We can still have this, legislative body, in our government who will promote the interest of culture and so on, but not necessarily the language. We can still translate their show their different stories which they had in their culture and so on. And we believe we are not forbidding the culture. And in case of language, what's also essential is that we can never make people love the language, and we believe that these speakers still have a lot of alternatives to survive. And we like talking about the redistribution of money, we believe that we cannot just take money from people, people's taxes, and redistribute it for the benefit of the interest of very small groups. As it's the same as we don't redistribute money to, you know, support different BDSM gatherings. We do not support different role players just because they find it, this is okay, this is very essential to them, as well as language is essential to these small groups, but nobody else supports it, and it is not really essential to their survival. And we believe that in this case, these language carriers, these natives, they are responsible themselves for promoting this language. It's in their interest, and it doesn't serve any like benefit to the society overall. It doesn't give me any benefit to learn this language because I'm not going to get better opportunities with it and express myself better. So we believe otherwise what we could do with this money is just probably help them to assimilate more, because probably these parents, these traditionalists, probably force their children to preserve this language. They probably force them to keep these traditions and kind of forbid them to go out of this bubble. And you know, they kind of how to say, condemn them if they go to if they learn only English and so on and so forth. And we believe that we should give them more incentives to actually assimilate, because we believe that nowadays these people in these small communities are being like 50-50. Some of them want to preserve, and but they still do not have a lot of resources. They still do not have a lot of, you know, a rich language behind, and they cannot really promote it. But another half like thinks, what if I assimilate and just go and you know, just live normal life? And we believe in this case it's better to help these people assimilate, to create more schools like that would teach them English more qualitatively, for instance, and probably give them more incentives to, you know, if you are, for example, of this language, we will give you another kind of a bit of this money from the subsidies to make you actually learn language, make it for free for you, for example, and so on and so forth. And we believe this will make people more integrated in the society and not feel like they're being abandoned and so on. And we believe in this case, if they switch to this, you know, business language, to this language that everybody uses around, probably they will have better means to express themselves, a better understanding, and people, they will be understood overall. And we believe that it's never really fair to consider such small interest and on which nobody else agrees. And because government cannot really make this language popular and put too much money to make it popular in the media and in films, because we believe this is unimaginable to happen. That's why we strongly support this motion. Vote for the open environment.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech. And just for reference, if there's you know, some kind of unexpected disruptions like that, I'll just pause the timer for a couple of seconds, or like whatever time it takes, just so people are aware. So if there's some disruption during your speech, someone joins the room or something, I will pause the timer and you might have a bit of extra time. I can show the timing with my hands for 7 and 6 to be clear. And without further ado, I call upon the leader of opposition to start a case for side opposition. Here.
Okay, I hope you all can hear me well. From the opposite side, from the proposition side, we had some points concerning the that states should never protect dying languages. So firmly we believe that in some cases, for example, when there are only 2 or 1 people speaking this language, it's unnecessary to protect these languages, because we really agree that it's just a waste of resources. But we are not talking about people who speak this language when there are 10, like several hundreds of these people, several dozens of these people. And actually, the government told us something about that when we do not protect their languages, we can assimilate these ethnic groups with the rest of the population of this state. But actually, we believe that the reason why languages are dying is that because of the discrimination and because some assimilation policy of the state, it's not always compulsory, but it's so. And we believe that when there are several dozens of people or several hundreds of people or 1,000 people speaking this language, they still preserve their strong identity, and they continue speaking this language just because they believe they should do it, because they feel this their ethnic identity, and because they simply love their culture, they simply love their language, and so on. So if they didn't want to speak this language, they would easily get rid of it, but they still are speaking this language. That's why we believe that this languages are really important for these people. And actually, the reason actually, if the reason why languages are dying is discrimination of the state, or maybe because these ethnic groups are simply dying because of this shortage of their population, because of different reasons. Actually, they still feel this ethnic identity very strong, and in the case when states stops protecting these languages, when it stops financing different cultural organizations, stop financing the different books and so on, literature and so on. So these ethnic groups think that state does not want to care about their interests. They feel that this state doesn't want to protect their culture, and so they just try to feel a strain from the state on their culture. So we think that when the state stops protecting these dying languages, these ethnic groups simply lose trust to this government, and they think that simply the state does not want to protect their interests. So that's why we think that the state should not stop the protecting these languages, because it's the way to preserve this connection with these ethnic groups and to preserve their trust to them. So secondly, what we want to say is that sometimes not sometimes, languages always reflect the mentality of people. Some language, we can understand the way people think. And also we think that sometimes it's really impossible to translate some phonetic instructions, whatever connected languages, and that's why if to change the language to speak like English or other official language of the state, sometimes they cannot simply transfer their ideas. They cannot simply say explicitly what they want. So language is the way of communication. And if in the state there are these ethnic groups which strongly believe in their identity, and sometimes the state really needs to communicate with them, so to find some dialogue and so on, the only situation to completely understand the needs of these ethnic groups is to preserve these languages, is to make translations from this language, is to learn this language and so on, to make everyone understand each other. This really leads to the dialogue. And also the proposition, the prop side said us a lot about texts, but actually we believe that the amount of such languages is not so big. So for example, in one statement, this so on, and we believe that this amount of resources is not so big to say that people need to take huge resources from other spheres, for example, social protection, just to ensure the existence of these languages. So we firmly believe that the distribution of money will not occur, and that there will be no dissatisfaction of the population with this government and so on, because simply the states will not have to take a large amount of money to the existence of these languages. And so yes.
Opening opposition, you're talking about the difficulties of translating certain words, but words die all the time. If we look at 1700s or 1800s English, for example, or even further before that, there are cultural ways in which language just evolves naturally. Why is this something that's necessarily a negative or a bad thing that we should waste resources to protect?
Well, actually, we do not see something that when people deprive their language by their own wish. But if we look at the situation in the world, in most cases, like in majority of cases, languages are dying not because people want them to die, but because of some other reasons, because there is a strain from the state, because there is a shortage of the population, just because, like, I don't know, for some other reasons. So we firmly believe that these people do not want their languages to die. And this is the reason, like, in our case. And actually, I wanted to say that we believe that it's possible to make this language flourish and not to die. The example of these languages is Hebrew, because in the end of the 19th century, this language was completely dead, and it's not true that nations do not want to protect these languages by themselves, because there were only several people speaking Hebrew in that times. But when a person who was initiative, who wanted to the revival of this language, he appeared. If only several people were speaking this language, as the believe in is that it's important to preserve the culture, and we believe that so language reflects the culture of specific ethnic group. So more information will tell you my teammate, and thank you very much.
I thank the leader of opposition for her speech and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case of opening government. Here.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So first off, a couple answers to the previous speech. People are not deprived from their identity. We're not depriving them from their languages. They can still speak it in their communities and can express themselves whatever they want. Moreover, Nursulu already explained how we cannot actually do this thing, how we cannot protect it, and how we cannot give these people that want to speak their language like comfort that opening opposition wants them to give. Two reasons for that. Actually, it's impossible to make the general population to speak some dying languages because they don't want to, because it's unpopular. For example, some businesses, they understand that they like cannot use this language because it's unpopular and because like it's no good for them in capitalistic manner. That's why a government cannot force anything like that. And in the daily life, for those people that actually speak this language, it will be it will be like no difference if we enforce that thing. Moreover, we see that the for example, the opening opposition is telling about the guilt that we are the guilt of the general population to these minorities that are right now suffering of this of the fact that their language is dying. But we see that current administration and current general population is not guilty of it. Maybe it was their like ancestors or something like that. So it means that right now in the status quo, no one is guilty for things that happen in the status quo, meaning that the general population is not guilty of it. Moreover, even if it's guilty, we'll later explain why for those people that are right now the for the people that are speaking these dying languages, it would be better to adopt and transfer to the popular language. We are talking here. What is the metric here in this debate? It's what's good for the real people that actually a minority that actually are right now speaking these dying languages. Not for some scientists or culturologists that wants to study it. We're talking about like real people. Several reasons why government cannot repair dying languages. First, people just don't speak it because it's unpopular, and moreover, in the urbanized like area, when we see how like where the internet is so spread, we see our internet is so spread and all the people are on the internet, and lots of people are trying to be more globalized, to increase their job opportunities, to increase their educational opportunities. They try to be more global, and thus they're trying to speak English or whatever other, for example, Spanish languages that are matter more in the status quo. Moreover, there is no demand for professionals and specialities in the status quo, and the artificial demand that government will make will not compete with the free market. For example, with the free market, we see that Harvard or for example scientists journals already have a lot of reputation, and they're and high quality, meaning that it will be very hard for government to compete with that. And in this case, we will see that it will be no good for the language, and we will not see any improvement in it. Moreover, we can see that the language is actually a tool, and its functionality is in communication. And in the society, it's very important. The communication is very important. It's essential for people to speak the same language, because it's your networking, because it's your people that you know well, like your friends. It's education. It's your job opportunities, etc., etc. So we see that communication skills and language you speak is very important. And if people will hold their dialect, will continue to hold to their dialect language, we're depriving them from the opportunities and from the opportunities that general language is giving them, that will give them. In status quo, a lot of people that are speaking dialect language actually are their children and other people that are a little bit more globalized are trying to learn second language, Spanish, English, and etc., etc. And that's why there's more opportunities for them, and they are now have more more educational opportunities. Okay, closing.
Those are all the reasons why the state specifically should sponsor them and why free market can't solve their problems. Surely, if you will obligate people to learn the language in school for 10 years, those people will learn that language and at least have access to it.
Okay, but if the general population speaks English, it's impossible it's actually impossible to enforce the dying language, because will be a lot of protests, a lot of a backlash from people, and probably we're talking about subsidies of those people, of the small minority, about books, about maybe extra courses, and because of the genre of the no demand of it all, it won't have any popularity, and in this case your government bill, whatever, it will be blown up and it will be not effective. So we can see that if you are trying to hold to this, if you are trying to hold these people to their dialect language, there will be less opportunities for them, and less opportunities for them to increase their rights, to increase amount of rights they have, because the more if you speak English, you can go to any kind of university. If you speak English, you can go online and share your problems and stuff like that. And if they know this language, they can speak about their problems, and they can increase their amounts of rights and be more viral about the stuff. So on our side, why on their side of the house it happens and these people are have less opportunities to get their rights? Because the government will enforce all those teenagers that are now trying to be more globalized to study this language for 10 years, for example, or they will enforce this, they will appreciate it and stuff like that. It means it deprives them from learning general language. It closes them in their community, and it is bad for them, because it's not exactly what they could have choose if they learned English more. So on our side of the house, we see how these people are naturally given more opportunities to study abroad. We see how on our side of the house they're getting more opportunities to assimilate. Why it happens? Because, as I already explained, because all of those teenagers and young people, that are in the status quo, they are highly globalized. They have internet. They have a lot of networking online, and in this case, they're highly motivated to learn the language, to increase their amount of rights.
And then 30.
Okay, and to be. And to have more networking. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for its speech and call upon Deputy Leader for Opposition to conclude the first half of.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll start with some points that our government was telling us, then I'll continue our own line of argumentation, and then I'll compare the sufferings that we have in our world and that government is trying to give us. So with some rebuttal points, I'd like to address the first speaker of government first about the point about assimilation, because the second speaker was also telling us about it. So they said that today we have this pressure and we don't want people to feel it. But we think that assimilation isn't actually a good thing, and this is really a problem that we're struggling with. And really, in today's world, there is no pressure, and when we support these languages, we don't present any pressure to these people. Like, what pressure do you imply on? So do you say that when mother motivates a child to learn this regional language, this is the pressure? Of course not. So it only means that these languages are really precious for them, for their mentality, for their culture, maybe some kind of their family heritage. So this is just telling us that people really need these languages and they want them to continue living and not just to die. Also, there was argument on the second speaker that people still can speak these languages and government cannot make some other people use them. Well, we are not trying to force anybody to use these languages, just people who are not trying to use these languages. We just want to make these minorities feel that they are supported, that their heritage is supported, and just to give some means for these people to their following generations to study these languages. We're speaking about some families, some towns that have these languages, and of course right now they speak them. But if from now on government will not help these people to just support their languages, they will have no books, they will have no schools or where they can study the languages, so they will just have no means. And we're just trying to give people a choice. If they want to study these languages, they should have some opportunities for this. If they don't want to study them, they will not have opportunities. So we're just making the world a better place, because now people can choose what to do with their lives and what language to speak. And the last argument of government was that language is a tool for communication. No, thank you. So we need just to understand each other and speak one language. So are you implying that there should be just one universal language in the world and we should destroy all the other languages and cultures and mentalities with that? So if you say that we need to understand each other, this means that it would be great if the world had just one language and all the other people just had to forget about their heritage, their cultural stuff and so on. But we cannot agree with this, and also we just want to give people a choice of opportunities. So if they want to, they should have some means to study these languages. All right, so now I'll continue with our own argumentation. Okay, yes.
Providing a choice is what the status quo looks like, where they are dying because of the momentum of dominant languages. Your burden is to defend protecting them and protecting their continued use, which means more aggressive policies to ensure that they're being used, or else they will die like they are in the status quo.
Well, we don't believe that in a status quo, no government support these languages. We can't agree with this. So you're just trying to make states never protect dying languages. This is what government tells us. Because nowadays, some governments do support these languages. Some governments do create some special faculties, some schools, some books, and so on to support these languages. So this is why they are not just that already. So we just want to keep them like this. We don't want to make people more people speak the languages like in the world, all people in the country and so on. We just want to give people from these towns, from this countryside and so on, have possibilities to speak these languages and to give chance to their following generations to continue this stuff. No, thank you. So now about cultural heritage, why we think that it's so important for us and that it depends on languages. Because we know that some songs, some poems are just on those languages. And they will also die and be forgotten if we just stop supporting these languages and no people will just speak these languages. Of course, you can say that they can be translated and such stuff, but really, we don't believe that this is true, because language tells us a lot about culture, about people, and this will never sound the same on some other languages. So we still believe that people just think that their culture is precious and they want to protect it. And moreover, we understand that some words are unique to some languages, so they can just not be translated, even if you want to. So these words will also be forgotten, and people will have less means to just express their emotions, express their feelings, and so on. This is what my teammate was telling you about when she spoke about communication, and that this is really important now. Okay, so now I'll try to compare sufferings that we have in both cases. So government wants people from these who represent these languages of minorities to suffer. They will feel that their languages are not valued in this country, and they are not valued as well, because government doesn't want to support their languages, government doesn't want to support their culture and such stuff. So we understand that if people right now just, in some groups of course, speak these languages, they use their culture and so on, they will be suffering because of this lack of protection. They will understand that my son, my grandchildren, they will not have possibilities to study these languages because there will be no schools that give them this possibility. There will be no books, no textbooks, and so on. So we understand now time, like it's just 30 seconds. So we understand that they will suffer a lot. And what do we tell you? Well, government doesn't spend a lot of money on this. So there are no struggles for government to just spend just some of money on this, because we understand that if we compare just this small, tiny amount of money, that is really nothing for the government, and sufferings that these minorities will have, we understand that their sufferings are something that we don't want to cause by this rule. So we understand that we want to support these languages. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech and call upon Member of Government to extend on of side government here.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. All right, so before I get started, I apologize. I have a bit of a lisp. I embarrassingly bit my tongue quite badly, so my tongue is very swollen, but hopefully you can still understand me. All right, my time starts now. I think the upper half of this debate got caught in the mog of when do governments have rights to individuals or what certain types of individuals to protect. I think we need to focus on the more macro level picture in terms of when states should or should not engage in certain policies. And we're going to be bringing you two reasons why states shouldn't engage in certain types of policies when they have a very low probability of success and when it's impossible to arbitrate or execute those policies fairly. And so this is how we're going to meet the burden of this debate of what states should never do. We think when states are allocating resources or making decisions about the types of things that they'll do, they'll focus on these two metrics. And so even opposition can cherry pick like one example where this might be good. States won't make decisions about if there's one possibility where something will be good. They make decisions about how they're able to do something like fairness and also what's the probability of success. Before I jump into my case, a couple extraneous responses to OO. OO really wants to center this debate on a post-colonial context of a really oppressed minority and the language that they operate under. I don't think this is true, and my case is going to show you lots of other reasons why language dies. But if we take OO at their best, and this is a super post-colonial context, we don't think that those communities probably want the state involved anyways. If the state was the aggressor and the oppressor, we don't think that the communities even want the state involved, which means they're going to resist it, they're going to act against it, they're going to see it as an intrusion, and it'll be very difficult for the state in order to be able to do it effectively. Second, they say they want to make it a choice. You've already heard my POI that in the status quo in a lot of these areas, they offer these languages and they are dying anyways. I'm going to give you lots of reasons about why that's an organic thing, but that's what the status quo looks like. And so they have to defend actively protecting it, which my case will address. But secondly, even if providing it just as a choice fulfills the burden of OO, again, all the momentum of dominant languages means if you provide it as a choice, it's likely to die anyways, therefore likely to fail the government policy and not something the government should do. Okay, jumping into my case, first argument, why is the probability of success entirely low? Two primary reasons. First, languages die all the time. This is due to a variety of different reasons. The first is that not all languages are suitable for a globalized world. Some languages, for example, are far too complicated. So if we look at the Chinese government shift away from Cantonese towards Mandarin, this is because Cantonese is far too complicated to actively distribute en masse. Cantonese academic scholars of Cantonese don't even know how many tones there are within the language. And so there are lots of natural reasons why languages become less and less used and move towards death or move towards non-use. The second reason has to do with how culture changes, right? We think that a lot of time language focuses on things that might no longer be relevant. So if we're going to use the word like trailblazing, which refers to manifest destiny, the further and further we get away from that in US history, the less and less relevant that language is going to be, and those words and those phrases are going to die. Secondly, we think that language can also be tied, no POIs right now, to things that are part of the culture, and often things that might be offensive. So things that are tied to patriarchal norms or things that are tied to heteronormative norms. And the further we get away from that as a society, the less those words and the less those phrases will be used as well. And so all this is an organic process. We don't see why it's so significant that languages will die other than them being linked to kind of cultural identity, which I'll touch on in a sec. But please note, Madam Chair, that this directly clashes with OO and the top half's focus. Because when they say that, oh, languages only die because of active discrimination, I've given you like 4 reasons why I don't think that's the case. But I also don't think languages die due to active discrimination. It's far more likely that our reasons are true. For example, in South Africa, where we had an extraordinary amount of discrimination against small minority groups, there are still tons of small languages that are used in South Africa amongst a variety of different minority groups. And so even like at the pinnacle of what apartheid looked like in state aggression and oppression, those languages still did not die. So I think that the reasons that we gave you are far more preferable and explanatory. Second, the second primary reason why there's a low probability of failure is by the time a language is dying, it's already far too late. By the time a language is dying, it means that an enormous amount of people are no longer speaking it, no longer using it. A dying language means it's not something that's organically being processed or passed on by people anymore, which means that it will require an enormous amount of state resources in order to be able to reverse this process, right? And this is in addition to the reasons that the languages are probably complicated or not super relevant for people to be using anymore. But if we're going to shift away from only minority speaking it, which is what we see in the status quo, to a majority speaking it, which means you have to do a huge push of having it be used in schools or forcing the majority to use it. We think this is an uphill battle. The majority of things in these areas are probably already going to be in the dominant language, like schools and curriculums or textbooks are already in English, which means it's a lot of resources to use. And secondly, there's already a lot of forward momentum from these dominant languages, like all the school curriculums are already in this language. There's going to be an extraordinary amount of public backlash against that towards the minorities. But all of this means is that the policy is likely to fail, which is the unique thing that we're focusing on here. Our second reason is that the state is just a bad actor to be doing this in general. We think that regardless of whether you're focusing on a context where languages are dying naturally or in a post-colonial context, this is relevant either way. Why? One, if the state is the arbitrator here, they're going to require oversight. You're going to need state approval on everything, state standardized curriculum, anything. It's going to be slow. It's going to be bureaucratic. Secondly, we think it's often hard to do. So even if the state was able to do this well, for example, languages being difficult like Cantonese, I've already given that reason. 3, states have limited resources. Just in general, it's always a resource trade-off. But secondly, this is not a popular use of funds, right? First of all, it's going towards a very, very small minority group. It's difficult to justify that to your voter base, and so you're not likely to get long-term support for it. And secondly, it's not an intuitive use of funds. Like using money in order to be able to like help people who need healthcare is always going to be more intuitive to voters because it affects a much more broader majority, which means that the state is not going to be able to effectively galvanize support for this policy. All this means a couple key impacts. One, it's probably going to change how the language is taught. And this directly clashes with OO's identity argument. If we care about language being linked to identity and culture, we also care that it has to be accurately taught in order to retain that identity and culture. So if the state is an ineffective actor at doing this, you're not able to retain the identity and culture, which means you're not able to accomplish what OO wants to bring us anyways. Secondly, they're probably going to teach it poorly for all the aforementioned reasons I've given you, which means that the language is likely to die anyways because it's not being passed on well. I'll take a POI.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
yeah, go.
For the vast majority of these cases, what could happen is certain states that have autonomous regions, such as in Russia, where the languages are dying, where you can allocate resources, financial, and give them ability to create a curriculum and create financial distribution of those resources. Why is that not likely to be the case?
I think that that's something that you're already seeing in a lot of places, like Oho has talked about. But even if we're able to focus on those areas, I've just given you like 5 mechanistic reasons why it's likely to fail. Moving on, we think that states can't fairly choose between dying languages, right? And so you can't save all the dying languages for the aforementioned reasons I give you. States have to pick and choose. And we think this is principally unfair if we take OO at their best and languages are intrinsically tied to identity and culture. Like, how can you pick the propping up and the preservation of one marginalized group in your society versus the other? Because I think it's just unlikely that you're going to be able to like effectively save all of them. So you're probably going to have to prioritize your resources towards certain dying languages. We think this is principally unfair when all these people are paying taxes, all these people are your citizens and you owe them an obligation. And because you can't effectively or fairly pick between them, we think that states should never engage in picking between them because it's not fair and it's not something that we can practically do or that we have a high likelihood of success in doing, which means that states should never really be engaging in this type of policy. Thank you.
I thank the member of government for that speech and call upon member for opposition to extend on their side. Here.
Okay, thank you. Before I start my speech, so my internet shut off for a couple of minutes during the last speech, so probably some things won't be refuted, and maybe my partner will pick that up because I couldn't, like at all. Also, maybe because my internet is starting to act up right now, I'll be kicked out, so please be prepared in that case on your timer. Okay. So, Honorable Speaker, in my speech, I'm going to be focusing on 2 arguments. First of all, on principle, I'm going to explain to you why it is important for us to immortalize languages and people who work to create works of art in them. Second of all, I'm going to explain why languages are a unique unification tool that can help those post-colonial societies, and I'll explain in comparison with CG why it's still likely to happen, to unify them and give them abilities to put up pressure against their colonizers, okay? So in framing, we agree with CG, and okay, so why people do try to work, right? We believe that immortalization as a part of a community or as an individual is something that is a core part of why we as people in general try to continue carrying on with our lives and continuing to put in work, right? Our values, you know, we care about advancing our values, our deeds, our actions throughout our culture, throughout our children, throughout some particular artifacts that we make, and etc. I believe it is an extremely strong normative motion that demands us to care for future, but also be happy while we're doing that, which is something that is necessary for most people to live a happy life, because essentially a lot of work that they're doing is targeted at something that they are not going to see in the future. Why is that important? Well, we believe that with a language, that goal that people have strived for also dies if that language dies. How? Well, we believe that A, obviously a lot of stuff is just inaccessible anymore, so people cannot read it because they don't know the language. But B, we believe that even like translation and things like that, they cannot preserve everything, right? Like if you listen to Foucault, he claims that you cannot express yourself in your enemy's language because you lose the subtleties of this language. You lose the idioms, you lose the wordplay, you lose the philosophical meanings that can only be understood through your language. And for purely, no, thank you. For purely linguistic reasons, like translations are always just a crude copy and they're irrepresentative of the originals that have been made no later. And why is that important? Well, we believe that works of lifetimes of some people, like of artists, but also of people who have worked in order for those artists to have an ability to create art, such as just, you know, simple peasants, etc. They are no longer here. You know, the folk stories that they have created collectively are no longer here. The past also applies to us and creates a powerful, this cultural bond for ourselves with the past, but also understanding that we are not going to be forgotten, which is extremely important for those people. And we must understand, like, this is a big kind of contradiction would be to say that, oh, but these people are dead, so why should we care about the works that they have done? Because we already do care about the works that dead have done, because of the fact that we do all of those preservations, and this is basically the contradiction that the government side will have to face if they'll try to claim something like that. But on the second thing, why we believe also in like the world that's happening right now, it's very important for us to preserve languages. So we believe that oftentimes groups require language in order to achieve their political goals and anti-colonial struggle. How is that? Well, we believe that language is an inclusive part of your identity, as in it unites the nation pretty well, as no one really renounces their own language, right? Sometimes people just don't have access to it. For example, as Irish people did not have access to speaking Irish before the time that they... So, okay, take as example Ireland, right? Ireland didn't have... Irish language was no longer here because British Empire had a policy that succumbed their language and replaced it with English language. In the same way, Cantonese language was trying to be succumbed by Mandarin language when Communist Party of China tried to do the same thing. This goes directly in contradiction with what CG is saying when they are bringing up this South Africa example. South Africa just excluded people and let them be, right, in poverty and in awful conditions. In some places, this succumsion of languages happens and of cultures, and this is the place in which it's very hard for you to preserve your language and your identity. And we believe these things are crucially important. No, thank you. Why? Well, because other things are pretty divisive. Religious identity can be pretty divisive. You might have Catholics, you might have Protestants, they might not want to work with each other. You might have things like a political identity. Some people might be liberal, some people might be conservative. They also might not want to work with each other. But things such as language, such as culture, are universally acceptable to people as something important, as something that they want to preserve, right? Even if they do not speak their own language right now, even if they don't know that, they still know that there are some books that they would like to read that tell about the stories of their own nation's past and that they cannot do, which they would like to acquire. There's a lot of such things that people would like to have. And this is something that actually works even in real life. Like, for example, in USSR, you can see when the nationalist movements during the perestroika time were happening, like, for example, Kazakh politicians, they were not demanding for some kind of political reasoning things or religious freedoms. They are demanding for their language to be recognized in the same way as Russian language was recognized in the places in which they were living, right? Why is that important? Well, we believe that it's important because saving up those languages is extremely important in order to allow nations to have tools of unification that can work out for them, right? And obviously, it's also like things like religion, say, for example, might be usually like destroyed or no, thank you, or like replaced, right? And culture is being pushed out by other nations. You cannot just unify based on that, but you need to have this national identity based on that language. These important things, but also it's important not only in the context of letting people inside of this colonialist state like unify and make political demands, which may range from anything like from total independence to just stopping discrimination, but also like for international pressure to ramp up, right? For example, if you look at map of Russia right now and you look at Siberia, you will just think that Russians are living here because you're not familiar that actually hundreds of minority groups are living there, such as Chuvashs, like Evenks, whatever other groups that are living there because they have their culture succumbed into Russian culture. They speak the Russian language, and so they cannot put up themselves as different groups in international discourse. Language allows you to do that when you create art and culture in your own language, and therefore it gets picked up by international community as something that at the very least exists, even if it's not popular, and something that signifies that you are a separate entity from whatever majority group is, and therefore allows you to demand some kind of political support from whatever groups internationally, such as Amnesty International, UN, whatever, in order for you to get some kind of support in that regard. So we believe it's very important for those people as well, and it does not happen as rarely as CG talks about, and therefore we must win this debate.
I thank the previous speaker for that speech and call upon the government to conclude the case for that government. Here.
Dear Madam, both oppositions operate this debate under two still unproved assumptions. Number one, that if the policy is enacted, somehow it's possible to implement this policy towards these minority groups and therefore to save language. We have given you structural reasons that A, it won't happen, B, if it somehow happens, it will be worse off the very minority groups, including post-colonial context. I'm going to analyze this debate in two large clashes. First of all, what should be the metric for state subsidies and why language doesn't fall in this category under any circumstances whatsoever. Second of all, why given a trade-off of supporting minority groups in multiple other ways, language is probably the worst option to pick from. First of all, what states should subsidize? Because government just pointed out that if something is popular, we should subsidize this thing. We believe not. If something is popular, however, it's close to impossible to implement, or it brings some negative impact back to people, we should not implement this policy. We gave you 3 structural reasons why trying to save dying out languages lead either to impossibility to implement this policy, or leads to worse of outcome toward the group that they're trying to somehow help. So first of all, there are simple languages that are too complicated and people are actively rejecting to speak on them, which means it's absolutely the opposite of what both oppositions are trying to speak, which means they want to speak this language, they want to preserve their memories. It's rather a compulsory education, teaching them probably Irish schools in schools where the absolute majority of Irish children do not want to learn this language. You can do it still on your own. We are not arguing for some form of elimination of oppression, but presumably if this language is spoken in your community, you will still be able to have your own school, your own classes. We are speaking here about very active interference of the state that makes it rather more compulsory and universal towards the entire group. It's like a Chinese kid who rather prefer probably learning Mandarin over Cantonese because it's opportunity cost for this individual, and also it's just notoriously difficult to learn the full torturous and quite unpleasant process to begin with. Second of all, we explained to you there is no any inherent value in losing language whatsoever, because both oppositions operate on the assumption that will vacuum occur and I will lose immediately my identity and I will probably not be able to communicate. Both are not proven assumptions. What we have said, the mere fact that probably I do not know 50% of all words in Russian and George probably hardly knows 10% of all English words does not make me less of a Russian or George less of an American or British, whatever other identity he wants to associate with. In the same way, if we lose one language, it doesn't mean that I stop culturally interacting with my own community. Language is a set of words in the same way. If we lose some words in our mother tongue, it doesn't mean that we lose identity in itself. You can lose entire Irish language, but you will still define yourself as an Irish and you will be proud of your own country and you will still distinguish yourself from the Brits. The four opposition has not been able to prove this claim. Closing opposition only tried to do this asserting, but what about the process of immortalizing? What about our duty towards the passed away? We do have research, something that government pretty much openly outlined in their case. Immortalization will happen. We still know what the Sumerian language is, and we can immortalize it in a museum. We do not see any problems with this. More importantly, particular individuals who want to exercise this as their lifestyle choice, they will still be able to interact with this language and pay their personal duty and respect towards the group they want to associate with. Because the difference here, when state makes it compulsory and it's the only system where you can prevent languages dying out, allocating massive amount of resources, otherwise you won't be able to turn against this tide. It means simply makes rather from giving some duty towards respect rather to coercion that people do not want simply to engage with. Yes.
So we might know that Sumerian language has existed at once, but we cannot read it and we cannot know what exactly has happened inside of this language, which is not the same entirely with what we are talking about. Please prove the equivalency of your statements then.
Well, the equivalency was proven in numerous other examples. Let's proceed. Also, they have failed to prove why state is going to be a particularly good actor. Let's understand the context within which we operate. Dying languages means someone is supposed to study them. One of the core reasons these communities often are not capable to have their own access to resources and their own elites. Often their languages are studied by academics brought from foreign countries. Let's say a professor from Oxford suddenly will be in charge of the national curriculum of certain country and will start helping this community to universalize their language. What a particular harm here. Likely he will miss way more nuances studying this language than an average person within this community simply without standardized curriculum. Why? Because there are multiple tribes, there are multiple dialects, and likely what happens even throughout your lifespan, even like bunch of professors from outside, from abroad won't be able to properly understand it. More importantly, if we operate in the context of dying out languages, indeed, it's exactly the context of closing opposition. You have some minority group, however, resources belong to the majority, which means still the implementation of the policy is going to be in a such way when you will make their local mother tongue as more of a understandable and easy to get to the majority, because often there are intersections. It's exactly how the Belarusian language was shaped by the Soviet academics. It was absolutely misread and misused and was made similar to the Russian language, and it lost its authenticity. It was rather cultural oppression rather than act of glorification that closing opposition was speaking about. Briefly, both oppositions failed to prove simple fact that if state interferes, they're likely to fail, they're likely to misread the identity versus the comparative here, when individual communities are way better to preserve their own language. Or even if they lose it, they do still not lose their identity, they preserve it through other means and serve their interest better. But more importantly, trade-off. Let's assume in a post-colonial context, you do have multiple communities. It's not like you have one minority group and the majority. Often there are like dozens of minority groups. The best way to universalize your identity is across one impartial language like English, French. Even in the language of oppressors, less likely conflicts will interrupt because you will have to pick one language or another. You won't be able to make 10, 20 national languages and give them equal rights. It will turn your country into a mess with the high chances of religious, ethnic, and other conflicts erupting. For all these reasons, extremely proud to propose.
I thank the previous speaker for that speech and call upon opposition whip to conclude this debate as a whole. Here.
Natural evolution, the discourse of natural revolution is the same discourse that imperial rulers used to justify oppression of other cultures by claiming that one culture is inherently better than the other. We think that that kind of discourse is inherently pernicious and is the result of power differences that exist, and that it perpetuates those power differences in the future. We in closing opposition think that language provides an ability of one particular ethnic group to assert themselves against the colonial powers in the way in which they are unified against that struggle and is effective specifically under the colonial divider. 3 points in my speech. Firstly, on effectiveness. Secondly, on fairness to majority. And thirdly, on the ways in which post-colonial struggle will improve. So firstly, on effectiveness. So we think that it is clear to us in this debate that we on opposition should not be the ones that are defending bad faith actors intervening in language. We will not on closing opposition defend Soviet academics interfering with Belarusian language in the ways that is bad for Belarusian language. But burden of opposition in this debate is to prove the number of cases in which that is actually something that is good and the ways that it is actually good. We think on closing opposition, the kinds of countries and the kinds of places that it affects is either newly independent states with dying languages, or it's like giving the ability of national governments to provide resources to autonomous regions to actually supervise the supervision of that. We don't support United Kingdom designing curriculum for Wales, but we support United Kingdom giving resources and monetary resources for Wales to be able to design curriculum, enforce standards on in their schools. So we think that that is the kind of ways in which that actually works and the way which is good. So closing government says that they will teach them poorly. We think that the reason for that is because actors have bad incentives. We think that for those particular places where legitimacy is based on local allegiances and where you as like Wales devolved government get your legitimacy from the local people, we think that you have incentives to actually create a good curriculum in the ways that is not oppressive and the ways in which it's maximally inclusive politically for you to be able to secure that election. We think that that is not a big concern. Secondly, it is the reason for the problem with that they say is because you pick and choose certain languages that we don't know which one are good. So we think that this point kind of is close to like complicatedness of language that closing government says. We think that the ways in which that actually happens is where you have consistent demand of leadership of these communities to actually get to those languages. Yes, we agree that these are going to be the most vocal and the most powerful minorities that exist, where you have to choose probably the minority that is most represented. But we think that that's clear for us in this debate, is that where there is zero demand on parts of those minorities, you are not likely to see these kinds of efforts, and you're not likely to see that. But we say that there are cases in which you have the older generation of those people and the leadership of those people saying that the language and outcrying this in publicly, where you actually then provide the support by media. We think that specifically for reasons outlined by closing government, where it is politically difficult to actually enact those policies, the policies that are going to be chosen are the ones where people know about the existence of a problem and they know that it's something that is important for people. It's unlikely that just a completely unknown, complicated language will appear and that you will have to choose. So that's why we think that that is important for those people, and it's something that is going to be very good for them and something that those people actually need. So we think that that's going to be effective. Secondly, on fairness to majority. OG says this is a small group of people. We think, yet note, OG themselves claim the point on accessibility. They say, if this is a museum and we provide access for people, this is actually something that is principally justified. We think by the same token, you provide poor people access to museum by taxpayers' money, the same ways you actually provide support for culture, for access to culture for these minorities. Secondly, the closing government says it is not universal, it is not a universal good. We think states made these trade-offs all the time. We think that basic rights like community housing, where you give vulnerable people, is the same for these people because of their ability to engage with their culture and identity. But secondly, states don't do that just for the most vulnerable. They do that to achieve certain political goals, such as sponsorship of smaller political parties to support diversity in political goals. We think that in the same way, it allows actually those communities to have language, to perceive themselves and gain effective political presence. We think that that's something that states can do. Yes, closing.
All right, I don't think it's really fair to say that we're going to center this on post-colonial governments, but then you're only going to defend examples where post-colonial governments are acting in good faith. But even if we are looking at those examples, why would communities embrace their oppressors' involvement? Why would communities even want their oppressors' involvement?
Look, it's in the cases where autonomy community in those places say, we want resources to be able to do that. We don't have enough financial resources. Give us money, and they negotiate. And we think that that's politically something that is feasible. And something that they could do. Post-colonial struggle, we think closing government largely ignores this point. We think that is very crucial in this debate. CG claims that you don't have to know all the words in the language to actually have the feeling of identity. We think the comparative is not you knowing all the words or some words. The comparative is not having language at all. And we think that in those cases where that happens, we still where a community loses completely language, there are some markers that exist in those places. You still have a political historical continuity of places like Hong Kong that feel that they are different from the rest of China. You still have ethnic markers, you still have religious markers. But the problem in those cases is that firstly, they lose some legitimacy to actually secede from those countries. Like, let's say Hong Kong loses legitimacy to is less legitimate in pursuing independence, specifically because now everyone speaks Mandarin in Hong Kong and everyone knows that everyone speaks Mandarin. They lose some political capital in order to be able to secede from China. They don't have the political mobilization necessary. No, thank you. Secondly, they also, ethnic markers, even if they still exist, they might be divisive in the way religious markers, they might be divisive. We think on the contrary, in which all the people share one language, engage with the same media that is different from the one of their oppressors, and have access to that culture, that political struggle is more unified and more effective. This is the most important impact in this debate, Mr. Speaker, because given the ability for countries to actually to be able to secede from other places is something that that comparatively the amount of oppression that exists in the world is far more important than the fact that the majority feels that their taxpayer money is being taken away, because this is the most vulnerable community. This is the community that is most discriminated against in the future. And lastly, on the point of immortalization, on closing, there is no response for our point. We say that immortalization is important for people because they know that their future generation will actually access that. And those communities right now, because they know that language will be used, they lose all that meaning in their life now and all the past to oppose.